Right on. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the weekly Mozilla Webmaker Community Call. Great to have you all with us, and great to see so many names on Etherpad. We are very, very lucky to have a special guest this week, Mr. Douglas Rushkoff, who's going to share some thoughts and then open the floor up for questions and conversation. So without any ado, Douglas, let me hand over to you and invite you to tell us what's on your mind.
Well, first, hey everybody. As a member of the public, I appreciate what you all do, and I don't curse you even if my Firefox stops working for some reason. I accept that as part of the privilege of working with truly non-evil software and systems. I guess the main thing I want to talk about, I want to get your notes here on there, is that I feel like there's a few falsehoods that are perpetuated both in the design and design programming and general community. And the first is that there's some kind of a trade-off between usability and programmability, and really since the early days, since the era of the Mac Classic and Windows 3.1, people have been arguing that in order to make computers easier to use, we've got to distance people further and further from the ability to program them. And that's just a false argument. The only thing that's true about it is that the less computers are like computers, and they're like very specific appliances, then maybe. So, the more you want your computer to act like a washing machine, the less you want people to be able to do to it. But other than those kind of bizarre situations, or as kind of an iPad-like situation where you're specifically trying to anchor interactive devices in a consumer paradigm and get people to stop thinking about them as tools or as technologies through which they can produce. In other words, not as digital things, but as kind of satellite-era electronic things, then, except for those kind of situations, it's just not true. It's a crock. It's kind of like saying that, if you want people to be able to vote, you've got to, they've got to see big pictures of the candidates rather than know anything about the issues. It's as if, the issues will get in the way of someone's actual voting. That it just doesn't make sense. So what I've been advocating over the last few years is that programming is a basic literacy in a digital age. That while people do not know how to, they don't have to know how to program, the entirety of Microsoft Word or Chase Manhattan Bank's website any more than a person who's basically literate has to know how to write the entirety of Finnegan's Wake. If we are in a digital age, we do have to know something about programming, at least what programming is from the liberal arts perspective, if not the engineering perspective. That the thing I've been arguing is, we got language, and we didn't just learn how to listen, we learned how to speak, and we get text. We don't just learn how to read, we learn how to write, and now we get computers, and we shouldn't just learn how to use them, but how to program them. Otherwise, we're not truly the user. The argument that people seem to be making against that these days, and it's particularly by programmers, I would argue bad programmers, but programmers nonetheless, people who understand some of these languages. Usually they're more like the COBOL types than the Java types, but they argue that, as someone put up here, that knowing programming is like knowing plumbing. It's best left to the professionals. Yes and no. I'm not really talking here about the difference between a driver and a mechanic, where the mechanic knows how to fix the car. I'm not talking about the person that you bring your computer to replace the hard drive or to change, to fix the RAM or to rebuild the power supply. Now, I'm talking about the difference between a driver and a passenger, right? Driving is actually knowing how to use the car. Programming is actually knowing how to use the computer rather than living up on the software level. The equivalent in a car of being just a passenger is truly being Miss Daisy, sitting in the back of the car with the curtains drawn, and you have to trust Morgan Freeman to take you to each place. You don't even know what's out there. You're no longer expressing your autonomy or agency through the device. You are trusting some other person to render the world and to bring the world to you the way it actually is. So it's not really a technical skill that I'm looking at, but a basic linguistic and navigational cultural skill that I'm talking about. If we're living in a world, as most of us are, that is increasingly defined by digital devices, if we're living on a digital landscape, then we have to be aware of how that landscape is constructed or what the biases of that landscape are, or at least we have to be aware of the fact that it was constructed in the first place. And I feel like as people get further and further away from programming, they begin to accept digital reality as a given circumstance, as a pre-existing condition of the universe. So you have kids look at Facebook and think, oh, this is a way for me to make friends, rather than looking at Facebook and saying, oh, this is a company that's monetizing my social graph. They have no way of understanding that. They have no way of seeing that the way in which Facebook wants them to parse the various elements of their personality are the decisions made by people who want kids to think about themselves or adults to think about themselves in terms of their marketing preferences or whatever else. That if they don't understand that they're in a coded environment, then they don't understand that this is not nature, that it's been created and tilted by others. No, reading Finnegan's Wake will not make you bald. Well, it really won't. It puts fur on your hands. I had that. I would show you in the picture, but you don't have to read the whole thing. You just read like 3-4 sentences, and you kind of get the gist of what it would be to read the whole thing.
Right.
So should we do some of these things on here, or do you want to pick them?
Yes, I'd say if you want to self-serve, help yourself, and otherwise we're glad to push them to you if that's easier.
The best call to action for people to learn.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The calls to action are interesting. I make this argument that I'm making today to, smart people who kind of, now it's considered smart, people who believe in things like evolution and, who understand that Fox News is weird and, just sort of people who think. I make these kind of arguments. To regular people, I found that the best calls to action are that 10 Chinese hackers are going to take down Citibank, and we need a generation of kids who can program our basic banking and economic defense. The argument that, the General Richard Elder, I think his name was, in Shreveport, I interviewed him, and he was saying that he can get plenty of kids who want to fly drones, but no one who can program them, and our technological superiority over places like, Iraq and China and Pakistan is going to be gone in one generation. He doesn't even have enough kids to service, who can program to service the existing drones, much less program new ones, and he knows that they're being hacked. So the argument that seems to work is that our economy, our economic and military, not just superiority but sustainability, is dependent on a Sputnik-era revisitation of science, engineering, and math in our schools. The more reasonable argument I make is that the digital age is defined by production, by making. It's called digital. It's the fingers. It's literally, this is stuff that you do and you make. And if you want to actually participate in what's going on at this point, in this shift from an industrial age economy to what we've been calling a knowledge-based or experience-based or e-based technological economy, you got to get your hands on the keyboard. You got to actually type. That there is a party going on, and the barrier to entry is much lower than people think it is. Even if you're going to learn it in a very object-oriented way, which is sort of looks like what you're trying to help people with is this sort of hypercard stack level of programming that is life-changing. That is to the 21st century what psychedelics were to the 60s, and to be alive now and not participate in this is like being alive. Imagine if you were alive during the space race and they actually were going to let anybody who wanted to get in one of these spaceships and go to the friggin' moon. I mean, that's sort of where we're at now, and that people are voluntarily denying themselves participation in that is shocking. So there's a lot of arguments to make, but yeah, the one that works the best is fear. You're not going to have a job. The Chinese are going to get your bank account. The Russians are coming. So learn this.
And Douglas, do you think fear scales?
Yeah, fear is about the only thing that does scale. Intelligence sure doesn't scale. But that's why it doesn't. It's not a mass. It doesn't yet. But yeah, I mean, fear does scale. Fear, at least that's what gets it in the schools. That's what gets policy. That's what gets. I found my articles where I say, learn code and you'll be able to get a job, do a lot better than the ones where I'm saying learn code and become part of, the autonomous human evolutionary future. Who gives, right? People want work. The irony is that it was easier to code in the old days than it is now. It's not because computers are more complex now, but because computers came with HyperCard. It was easy. Even, does Microsoft still come with Visual Basic? I mean, there were, programming was just part of the computer environment at one point, and it's really, that it's not anymore is odd. I think we got to address this sort of web making and in terms of making the mechanics intimidating for non-coders. And what that really gets to is sort of what is the best pedagogy for bringing people in to programming. In other words, do you just give them the fucking line interface like Code Academy is doing? And first I thought, wow, they're young, they're kids, they get it. And I tried to do it. Howard Rheingold tried to do it. A lot of people did, and kind of dropped out on week 6 or 8 or 9 of that because it kind of got hard in a way that no longer felt cumulative. So I do think that having people make things and learn to code as they need to learn it in order to make the things is the way to go. Now, I went to California Institute of the Arts for grad school, and the motto there was no technique before need. And the idea was that you don't teach an artist how to do anything until they need to know how to do it in order to make the project they want to make. And it was considered very radical in the 1970s when it came out, but it seems very logical now. So I think the pedagogy becomes one of how deep into this can you get. So if you start up on a sort of very object-oriented drag and drop modules, for a lot of people, just being able to make their way through a WordPress a style sheet that's already made is code for them. So it's that old thing I used to talk about with a gamer, that first they play the game, then they get the cheat codes for the game, then they get the mods for the game, then they can make their own game after that. So I feel like that kind of kerneled approach to all software. If all software had these ways that there's sort of, okay, here's the software, you could mod the software, you can go deeper in and mod this, you can go all the way there. when it feels kerneled, you can kind of get in there, and you only need to go as deep as you only have to learn to go as deep as you need to go in order to get it to do what you want it to do. But at each step along the way, you understand that, okay, these choices have been made for me. Do I like these choices, or is it worth it to me to learn just a little bit in order to remake these choices in a way that's more compatible with the thing I want to make?
Right on. And when you do teach folks how to code, what are your approaches for giving people sort of mental models to hang their understanding on?
I mean, I learned code in a different era. I mean, I learned BASIC and Fortran and Pascal. I learned friggin' stuff that doesn't look anything like programming now. I mean, I was never really able to do C because I would get these resource leaks, and it bubbled back on itself in a way that I didn't wrap my head around. I was using Borland 3.1 C compiler. I mean, is this just too ancient for anybody to even know what I'm saying?
Dude,
I mean,
you're talking like youth.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, it's a very different era. But, I mean, I tried with people I tried things like sending people to do Scratch and logos and things like that. And, I mean, interestingly enough, those seem, sadly and oddly and against my intuition, they seem to have been closed systems. In other words, people learn to do them and them kind of by themselves. And they don't seem to be gateway drugs to, the real LSD of coding. So I'm altering my view in the present tense. I mean, just yesterday, I was thinking a lot about Codecademy, and I very much want to work with them and support them. And now I'm beginning to question whether that window, elegant as it is the way in. It's thrilling, but I feel like people need a more modular building block. I mean, I thought Lego Mindstorms was going to do it, but I feel like they need a different way in. And I think it does have to do with regular people who are not just innately curious about learning for learning's sake. I think they need to see, oh, look, this is a phone, and you want to make something for this phone? You have an idea? Here's the tools you need to make that. So I think it does go back to that kind of maker mentality. And then helping them see that there's something more compelling about making something for themselves than using what's there. I mean, the big challenge for you guys is, why is it more compelling for them to program for the web than to grab a WordPress style sheet? And that's because it's got to be because there's capabilities that you're giving them. There's things people can do. There's a freedom. I mean, for me, I'm really still I've got my websites on maybe something worse than WordPress now. I experimented with it, and it's even weirder. I don't want to use WordPress for my web. I want to go back to HTML because at least I know how to use that. And there's something about that I think can be conveyed to regular people. That, wait a minute, you can just be in charge. It's like washing your dishes or something. It's like, this is not rocket science. And if you kind of keep it where you are, I mean, it's like having a hard drive is not a bad idea. You don't have to throw everything to the cloud. And having your hard drive doesn't put you in the camp with Ted Kaczynski either. There's a place where you can have some authority over what you're doing, not surrender that to these unnecessary interfaces, really.
Right on. Well, we've got time for maybe one more question, a closing comment or two. Do you want to talk about what you're working on now and what you're looking to do moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of finished what I'm hoping is my last book. I wrote a book called Present Shock, which is, it's kind of like Future Shock, but in the present, when everything happens now. And it's about the collapse of narrativity and all the way feedback loops have closed, and and all the various kinds of reactions people have to living in an utterly presentist universe, one with kind of with sort of an eternal duration, where all potential energies become kinetic energy, and how do you create meaning and make sense and make plans when everything is a derivative on a derivative on a derivative on a derivative. So it's really it's a fun idea, and I think I come out of it okay. I kind of push through the apocalyptic singularity people and kind of reveal most of that as religion, so that we can get on to presentism as a healthy thing, more like Occupy Wall Street as a form of patient presentism rather than this impatient panic for the end of the world. But as I'm finishing that and finishing this dissertation, I kind of want to come out into the world and be part of something more actual. I mean, I've got this PhD, which I want to use as a stamp of authority on things that I like. I kind of want to make myself available to things that are good and say, oh, I've got this PhD, and Douglas Rushkoff, PhD, says that this is good for kids, or that this is good for education, or that this is good for that, as a way of promoting what I like and discouraging what I don't. But yeah, I mean, so I'm looking forward to kind of a new chapter where I'm less sitting alone at home at the computer writing a book that a couple, maybe 20,000 people will buy, but then 3,000 people will actually read, and instead be more in the actual circulation.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these thoughts. As we wrap up this part of today's call, I wonder if you have any advice for these folks as they go forward in the Summer Code Party to try and show folks how to program rather than being programmed.
I would keep pulling back the curtain. That's what people like the most, is to see behind the thing. It's like there's this thing that Reason software does. It's a bunch of software of kind of virtual synthesizer stuff and mixing boards, and it looks like a rack, but then there's this moment where you can flip the rack around and see the patch board behind it. And there's that feeling when you're in a Mozilla browser and you just go view code, and you see the code behind it. To make that transparent, to realize that that's the aha moment for people, for them to make a connection between that stuff and what's on front, to change that little thing and then flip it around and they can see the change they've made, or have it side by side and see real-time changes. When people have the experience of their hand, developer view source. Oh, you have to go to web develop. Yeah, well, you make it a command key or flip a thing. If you're in learning mode, that should just be there. When people experience that transparently, it's so much more empowering than building some frickin' Dreamweaver thing. Once they experience that hand on the dashboard, I've turned this control, I've gone backstage and moved this dimmer and the lights went on. Once they get a taste of that, then they're in. I mean, then you've got them. I mean, that's the gateway. Is the sense of power and magic. And the more you can do that and do it at sequentially deeper levels, and then also showing them the amount of trust that they have to place in the people who are at the level below them. I mean, if you're making programs, you've got to trust your OS people. If you're making an operating system, then you're trusting your machine language people. If you're a machine language person, then you're trusting those chip people. And the chip people are trusting, I don't know who, like Tesla or somebody. There's always this mystery at the level below the level that you're actually working. But once you're aware of the tremendous trust that you're putting in those people, it just kind of changes the way you think about the people who are putting trust in your level.
Excellent thoughts. Well, Douglas, we cannot thank you enough for taking time to be with us on this call, and we very much hope that you will stay engaged as we do our Summer Code Party and really help us to achieve exactly the kind of outcomes that you're you're agitating for. So thank you. It's very inspiring, the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I would love to come to the party.
Right on. Well, we'll set a seat for you.